children experience their emotions, especially very young children, very intensely. And believe it or not, there's something under there that I've learned from seeing so many children, to tell you the truth, that they are afraid that the intensity of their emotions is going to drive their parent away.
Yeah.
Okay. They're not going to say that,
Right.
but that's the underlying fear.
Yeah.
So the worst thing you can do is say, I can't talk to you. Go to your room. You're a pain in the neck.
Welcome to Gap to Gig, the show for dads navigating the in-between season when work, identity, and priorities start asking different questions. Here we talk about what that season looks like and how to move through it with intention. I'm your host, Michael Jacobs, and today's guest is Dr. David Marcus. Dave's a clinical psychologist with more than 40 years of experience helping families under stress learn how to communicate better, especially when emotions run high. He's worked with parents, children, judges, and family lawyers, and he's seen firsthand how work pressure, conflict, and time scarcity impact kids and dads in particular. Dave's also the author of the upcoming book, Parent RX, which focuses on practical prescriptive tools parents can use to build healthier emotional connections with their children. Dave, I'm excited to chat with you today. Welcome to the show. Really glad you're here.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
My pleasure. So a lot of dads listening to this are trying to be good fathers and good providers at the same time. And it often feels like those two roles are pulling them in opposite directions. And you've spent
Yes.
decades working with families under stress. When dads come to you feeling disconnected from their kids, what's usually underneath that disconnection?
Well, you're actually mentioning it already. The stress on families these days is inordinate. Okay.
Yeah.
We've got work stress. We've got financial stress. We've got kids who can't just go out and play in the streets anymore. So everything has to be scheduled,
Right.
And one of the biggest things is actually the technology, because it used to be in the old days, I guess you'd say, that you could leave the work at the office.
Right.
We don't do that anymore. With computers and cell phones, it's almost like you're always on call,
Yep.
And also in the old days, it usually was a one income family.
Right.
And now, no, it's not like that at all. I think better than 90% of the people in our country are couples or in two income families. And so everything is much more rushed. Everything is much more like putting out fires, because
Right.
there's no time to just sit back and say, what? So everybody's in sort of reactive mode rather than response mode. And what I've tried to do in my practice is talk to parents about how to get some time to themselves so they can recharge, how they can work together in synchrony as far as parenting, because oftentimes there's a parenting style difference,
Right.
and also lifestyle. You can't do everything, and how do you sit back so that you can be what I call a soothing presence for your children and for your spouse or your partner?
Right.
And I've had to specialize in this. Families under stress. This is one of the biggest thing. What we're talking about is some of the biggest stresses that are on modern families these days.
Right. So it sounds like there's a lot of different potential factors, right? And I imagine then that parents it may not just be one factor, right? They're always connected to work, but they also have to, balance their parenting style with their partner, and they have to, they can't just let their kids roam, right? Like they could decades ago. They have to, like you said, schedule or plan more activities for them than before, because it wasn't just like, okay, go and play with the neighborhood kids, go run out, go, go to the lake or whatever is nearby, and hopefully they'll come back. It's a
Go to
different
the
time now.
pool in the summer, take
Right.
ride your bike there,
Right.
things like that.
Right.
Kids can't play out on the streets. I mean, I used to be, there was always typically a mom at home. You could always duck into somebody's house,
Right.
Not anymore.
Right. Right. And because you now have to balance both parents out of the house, there's the scheduling issues. It's its own stress almost, I'd imagine, of just like, right,
Yeah.
who's going to pick up the kids, who's going to be home in time to, make dinner or check on their homework or get them to their appointments or their games or activities, right? So there's a lot of different stresses, which is different than, you know, most dads today grew up in a different time, right? It was a different era where
Mhm.
some of these stresses existed, some didn't. The intensity of those stresses has probably changed over time. And,
Mhm.
you know, a lot of fathers will default to the parenting styles that they grew up with.
Yes.
But I imagine, you know, with the changing times that breaks down quite a bit with today's kids. Why do you think that is?
Well, of course, it depends on how you were parented.
Yes.
You know,
Good point.
you know, sometimes it's familial. You know, you have a very strict father, a very well subordinate wife, like a military family. Sometimes it's like that. Sometimes it's the opposite. You have seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. And where
Sure.
there's no boundaries. You know what I mean?
Right.
Everybody's talking about everything to everybody, which is kind of funny, but it's cultural. That's
Sure.
also something. Um, a lot of people, children should be seen and not heard. Uh, the English culture, keep a stiff upper lip. You know, the more some couples, some cultures, excuse me, we don't talk about emotions.
Right.
That's not a safe topic. We don't go there.
Right.
So there's all these things that, as well as what we're talking about. And one of the things we will probably get into, hopefully, is the fact that we take these things inside internally. It's called internalization. And it's almost like subliminal learning, like it gets in there below your level of awareness. And one of those things that children pick up from their parents that they internalize like that is how to react to stress.
Yep.
Okay. This is one reason why children who are abused, when they grow up, they get married and swear up, down, and sideways that they would never do to their children what happened to them. But under stress, and with children, it's worse because it's unanticipated stress. Children all of a sudden, well, they're some emotional intense thing. We have a tendency to regress. That regression, we regress back to these internalized responses.
Yep.
So they aggress, and they may hit their child. They regret it once
Right.
they calm down, but it gets passed on.
Yep.
I talk to parents about being a soothing presence for their children and their partner, because that too can be internalized. And
Right.
now they can be a soothing presence for their partner and their children. That's a wonderful legacy.
And when you say soothing presence, what does that
Mhm.
really entail?
Well, in its very simplest form, a soothing presence is somebody who's okay when you're not okay. Now, I'll explain why I use the word presence rather than person in a second. But when you think about the people, Michael, that you may turn to or I may turn to when we're stressed, when we're upset about something or feeling something intensely, we choose certain people,
Right.
certain friends, certain family members, and invariably the people we choose are okay when we're not okay.
Yep.
You know, as a therapist, as an absurd example that I give to the parents that I talk to, I say, what would happen if you came in and told me what was going on with your family? And my reaction was, oh my gosh, how could you possibly do? That's the worst thing I ever heard. You're laughing already. So do they,
Right.
because it would be, first of all, their response would be, this guy is weird, which would be true. And
Right.
secondly, how can he help us if it upsets him as much as it upsets us?
Right.
Now, the reason I use the word soothing presence rather than soothing person is because to be a soothing presence, you've got to create a soothing environment. And we get back to, what we just talked about, about lifestyle and reducing your stress level. Because if you're all stressed out, you're going to be in reactive mode. I could talk to you until the cows come home, but if you're in a regressed place, guess what? It's not going to happen.
Yep.
So we need a soothing presence,
Right.
you know.
And presence also implies that you're there, right?
Very good. That's
Right.
exactly right. And how can you truly be there if you're in reaction mode and you're all stressed and thinking about, gee, I've got this deadline that's tomorrow and I can't talk to my kids because I have to meet this deadline. And well, you get the point.
Right.
You know?
Right. So, I talk a lot to other dads about being active and present in their children's lives. And presence, it means a lot of different things to different people, right? There's the
Mhm.
physical presence of being there and like setting up some stability in that presence of that your kids can rely that you will be there. There are certain moments where they know you'll be there, whether that's driving them to an activity on a regular basis or having family dinners every night or
Mhm.
making breakfast in the morning for your kids. They know that, okay, you are there. And over time, you build up this experience with them that they know they can rely on you at that moment. That they tend to be, seems to be more, they seem to be open to being more vulnerable in some of those times, right? Those are the times where they might come to you with a concern, right? Because there's a comfort there because you've established this physical presence. But like you're saying,
Yes.
there's also an emotional presence, right? Of
Yes.
you need to temper your emotions. You have to still be, you can't just erase your emotions, right? You're going to have
No.
emotions, I imagine. So you need to balance them in a way that you are honest with your children, right? But you're also being present for them because you're able to focus on them because you're managing your emotions in a way that allows you to
Mm.
be emotionally present for them.
Let me add a codicil to what you're saying.
Please.
Okay. Parents have to be careful. You know, your children, all children are exquisitely aware of how their parents feel.
Yep.
I mean, you can pick up an infant, and if you're tense, they cry. I mean, this is just biological. All
Right.
right. So you're not going to kid your kids as far as how you feel, but you can also, there's a boundary. You can not use them as a confidant. You can't make your feelings their responsibility. They're not geared to that. They
Right.
can't do that, you know. And so what I tell parents to do is, yeah, I admit, yeah, I'm feeling this or I'm feeling that, but daddy can handle his own feelings. You don't have to.
Yep.
I'm still here. I can handle my own feelings. I tell people when they're controlling a child who is having a tantrum and they may have their arms around him because he's really out of control, this is what I tell them to do. I say, Daddy's here. Daddy's okay. Okay. Daddy can control his own emotions. I'm here for you. Because children experience their emotions, especially very young children, very intensely. And believe it or not, there's something under there that I've learned from seeing so many children, to tell you the truth, that they are afraid that the intensity of their emotions is going to drive their parent away.
Yep.
Okay. They're not going to say that, you
Right.
know, but that's the underlying fear.
Yep.
So the worst thing you can do is say, I can't talk to you. Go to your room. You know, you're a pain in the neck. Well, there it is. You know what I mean? Like they can't handle me. They can't handle my emotions and they're rejecting me.
Right.
I love when parents say, go up to your room and get control of yourself. If they could get control of themselves, they would.
Right. 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 They don't have to change spaces to do that.
Well, it calms them down, gets away from the stimulus, whatever it was, but it's not going to resolve anything.
Right. 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 So do you think like, or maybe I should ask, when a parent does take out their emotions on their children, perhaps inadvertently, right? Where they do have an outburst.
Yeah.
It, the next step really is to, I imagine, to own that, right? To be honest with your child. Like, I am not perfect. It's okay to see me as not perfect, but here is, I've made a mistake and here is how I'm going to address that mistake.
That's the second step, Michael.
Uh,
Okay. The first step is what you call the therapeutic response, for the lack of a better term. That's pretty general, but I'm
Sure.
never able to think of a better one. You say take ownership. How do you do that? You know, the important thing is that the child knows it. But before you do that, you go up to the child, and I did this with my own son. I'll tell you personally, when my son would really aggravate me, and I, blow up at him because I'm a human being, even though I am a psychologist. He'd, he'd be up in his room, huffing and puffing or something, because I told him to go to his room. And I would sit down and watch a Michael Jordan video. I loved watching Michael. You're from Chicago. I don't have to explain it to you. I love watching that guy play. I still watch his, videos, and that would calm me down.
Yep.
And I go up to my son's room, and I sit down with him. I say, "Son," his name is Seth. "Seth, Daddy did something that really made it tough for you. What was that? Why did I put it this way?" The typical response might be to go up to the room and give him lecture number 4 on why he was punished.
Right.
You know, he doesn't learn anything from that. Just that dad's mean.
Right.
By phrasing it this way, he doesn't have to defend why he's mad. I'm already admitting I did something that he didn't like.
Yep.
Well, that's obvious, but it's an invitation. Yeah, Dad, I really thought this was unfair, and you didn't, whatever it was, and I empty him out, which is a phrase we'll probably get to.
Yep.
Hearing him out, mirroring back what he said, and at the end, he's emptied out. We'll have to go into all this to explain it. But then he felt respected, and now he could hear whatever I had to say. Then you go into, well, when you did this, when you threw the pillow at my head because I wouldn't let you stay up late, which is true at one time, yeah, Dad reacted, So there's that step, and that's the more important step. Okay, because lecture number 4 is not going to help. And just saying, I'm bad, I'm sorry, doesn't let him empty out. Doesn't give him the opportunity to say, hey, this is how you made me feel.
Right. And I suppose then that by emptying out, by being able to express why he's upset or what's bothering him, that it, in a sense, allows him to reframe his situation, right? So that he can, he's aware of kind of like, this is what happened. I'm able to express that. And now I've kind of cleared my mind of, what was kind of on repeat. So now I can move forward. Is that kind of the
It's
end
close.
goal
It
to what you're,
is. Well, what I do is I teach parents how to do exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because it's a process. It's not
Right.
something that just is one step. It's not, because I'm using terms that, the dads out there might say, okay, what is that?
Right.
All right. Okay. I'll start with filled up because that leads to the emptying out, obviously.
Sure.
When I explain this to parents I see, or individuals too, if I'm seeing them and they, in their relationships are difficult, I explain we have an emotional space within us. And typically we point to our chest, our heart, when you think of emotions, but obviously it's really associations in our mind.
Right.
And believe it or not, most of the associations in our mind are emotional and not logical. All right. We all like to think of ourselves as really logical people. A leads to B leads to C, but guess what? If that was true, I'd be unemployed. I mean, it would be so easy.
Right.
So anyway, this space gets filled up with intense emotion, anger, anxiety, fear. In fact, in little children, you give them a little toy, they're intensely gleeful, and that fills them up.
Yeah.
It's the intensity of the emotion that fills us up. And what I want to explain to the dads out there is what happens when we get filled up, because we all have experienced what I'm about to tell you.
Yep.
Well, we know when we're filled up. We have phrases that describe it, Michael, like, I've had it up to here. The straw that broke the camel's back.
Right.
Right? So we know when we're filled up, and it's uncomfortable.
Yep.
It feels very intense, you can't think of anything else at that point. Sometimes it makes us fearful because you don't feel like we're in control of our emotions. Oftentimes you don't even understand why we're so angry or so anxious, And so what do we do? Well, we focus inwardly on how we feel and try to do something about it. Now, we may get it off our chest, for instance, or we may journal. We may go for a run to get rid of the energy. We may distract ourselves and watch a TV show that we enjoy. Whatever it is that we do, we are focused inwardly and trying to take care of this intensity.
Yep.
So by definition, Michael, we're not focused outwardly. And this is what that means. Somebody can give you the most logical, calm explanation for why you shouldn't feel the way you do, and we don't hear them.
Right.
We're so focused inwardly. We may hear, say, anger. We may hear that 5% that somehow makes us angrier, or the tone of voice that we don't like. And we react to that because we're filled up.
Yeah.
We're in react mode. If the person keeps trying to be logical, this isn't logical. So finally, they throw up their hands and say, I can't talk to you. And that's the beginning of the wall between people, between partners and between parents and children.
Yep.
Okay. So, in fact, a really graphic example of what I'm talking about is, have you ever heard the phrase a blinding rage?
Yes.
That's descriptive.
Right.
When somebody is that filled up with anger, they're pretty much blind to anything else that's going on around them.
Yep. And do you think when you get filled up, I know we talk about the emotional aspects of it, like your emotions get overfilled. And you mentioned like running to burn off some of that energy. Are there physiological effects of getting filled up?
Well, sure, sometimes it's flight or fight,
Right.
Sometimes it's tapping into something, which is another term that I use that makes it even more intense. Like the phenomenon that we call overreacting.
Sure.
Something happens, big reaction, and somebody goes, whoa, what's the big deal? And here's the odd part, because we feel embarrassment at that point,
Right.
Because sometimes, and this is what I help people do on an individual basis, we don't have the words for it.
Yep.
It's always just been a reaction that we've never really had to describe. And there we get into something else, we segue, an emotional language.
Yep.
We have to develop an emotional language. And so without it, we just react to things.
Right. What is sharing emotional language? What does it actually look like in real
You're
life?
talking about the common emotional language that I mentioned?
Yes.
Parents make certain assumptions when they're talking to their children about emotions. They assume, for instance, these are silent assumptions. They're not thinking of these.
Right.
That the child's experience, say, when they were really sad, for instance, something happened that made them sad. They think they know what sadness is, and they'll describe it to them, their child. Sometimes they'll say, "Oh, I know what you mean," and they'll go into their own experience, for instance, and how they handled it. Which actually cuts off the child's emptying out experience, because now the parent's talking about themselves.
Right.
And they're just trying to say, hey, misery loves company. I've been through it too, but that gets in the way. Okay. This is what I've learned from the children. I mean, I literally have seen hundreds of children from 3 on up. And with the younger children, young children don't have an emotional language yet.
Right.
That's why they throw tantrums. That's how they express themselves,
Right.
And it's the parent's responsibility to help them to develop an emotional language. How many times have you heard a parent turn to their child and say, don't hit your brother, use your words? Right?
Very common phrase.
Well, I was seeing 2 boys once, it was 7 and 9-year-old brothers, and I was talking to the mom for a few minutes, and they were in the waiting room, and all of a sudden we hear a scream, and we both ran out there. And the 9-year-old's holding his arm like this in tears, and the 7-year-old's looking like, oh, I'm in big trouble. And the mom, I'm observing this because I'm a psychologist, that's what I do.
Right.
And the mom turns to the boys, what happened? And the 9-year-old says, he bit me. And he picks up his shirt, and he's got teeth marks on his arm. He really got bit. So I felt really bad for the mom. She's mortified. Here she is, and the psychologist's office, and her kids are biting one another.
Right.
So she turned to the younger one and said, "I told you to use your words." And he looked at her in all innocence and said, "I don't know how." And I said, "Mom, that's where we need to go."
Yeah.
You see? So how do you do that? Well, you start young,
Yeah.
3, good age, 4. The child's already developing a language.
Right.
Now, they could be the brightest child in the world with a great vocabulary, but the assumption is wrong that they have an emotional language. How does that happen? Well, I'll tell you what I've done to help 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds to do this because it might help their parent. I'll just draw faces. This is not uncommon. Happy face, sad face, scared face. And I'll have the child look at the face and say, what word describes that? Mad. Okay. Happy. Scared. Okay. There's 3 easy ones. Okay. Now, and I'll start with saying, okay, I've already talked to the parents. When something like this happens, I'll say something, I won't say your parents do this, but, I point to a face. Can you give me another word for that? With little children, for instance, they don't have, I'll say, they make you, this said, this said, this said, this said. Sometimes they'll touch their hands behind their back. If you and I tried that, we'd probably break our scapula, but, they can do it.
Right.
And I'll say, okay, let's try to find words for that. And I've had some kids come up with great words. 4-year-old, the whole world mad. A little older child, 7-year-old, volcano mad. I love that one. Volcano war.
Yeah. Very descriptive.
The universe mad.
Yeah.
And then I'll say, okay, give me something that happens that just makes you a little bit mad. And like the one with the volcano man said, well, when my mommy makes me eat my peas, that's only this man. So from then on, I say, whenever we talked about something that made him angry, for instance, does that make you eat your peas mad or a volcano mad? And he beamed because I was relating it to his own experiences.
Yeah.
And that's the common part of the common emotional language with young children. Now, as children get older, they may not need that so much because they'll have their own wealth of experiences already, and
Right.
they'll use their own words and everything. But this is the way it starts, all right? This is the connection that people need to make with their child in developing an emotional language to use their experiences. Because really our job as parents is to help our children to learn from their own experiences.
Right.
This is the beginning of that, all right? Children don't learn from their parents' experience. I mean, parents try to say, oh, look, I went through it too. I'll give you an example, Father turns to his 15-year-old son and says, look, don't go out and drink 10 beers. I did it when I was a kid. And I ended up with my head in a toilet bowl. Don't do that.
Right.
So what does the 15-year-old do? He goes out and drinks 15 beers, ends up with his head in the toilet bowl. And father says, I told you that was going to happen. Why'd you do it? You can bet your bottom dollar grandpa told dad the same thing.
Right. Right.
We only learn from our own experience.
Right. And you have to provide your kids with the opportunities to have those experiences, right? You can't shelter them from.
We can't shelter them.
Right.
No.
Right.
Children, as they grow up, their world expands.
Yep.
We have to be the soothing presence so when something happens out there, they feel safe enough to talk to us and so they can work it out.
Right. I love how you meet them where they're at, right? With the younger ones in particular, where it was volcano and eating his peas, right? Like that is what matters to him. It wasn't, you're not being like, okay, yeah, when this happened, I get so mad. It's like something that he can't relate to, right? You're taking his own words, you're mirroring them back in a way that he can attach onto because he now knows that, right? And you're just kind of expanding that experience for him and showing how he can utilize it in other experiences. I think, oftentimes as dads, we tend to overcomplicate things, right? Like my child is mad about something, so, it must be X, Y, and Z, when really it's just the simplest thing that in their language, it's like, okay, yeah, it is just, I don't like eating my peas, right? It's, I don't like the taste of them. I don't like the texture of them. And it's like,
Hmm.
okay, so that makes you, you know, a little mad. But when your brother makes fun of you, it makes you, volcano mad, right? And so
Hmm.
you're giving them a way to express themselves that they can understand. You're meeting them where they're at, right?
Hmm.
And I assume then that's part of your soothing presence, right? Of
Exactly.
yeah,
You know, this is going to sound radical coming from a person, family psychologist who deals with children and parents.
sure,
I wish I could get rid of the phrase from parent vocabulary, make feel better.
mm,
It doesn't work. All you're doing is interrupting what they need to do. You know, telling them about your own experience, misery loves company. It stops them from being able to express themselves.
yeah,
Whereas now they have to sit there and go, daddy's talking to me.
right,
Try to, redirect them. Oh, well, let's redirect him so he's not thinking about it and make him feel better. Well, yeah, that might work, but it doesn't resolve anything.
yeah,
We try to explain logically why they shouldn't, feel the way they do, or just do this and you'll feel all better. That's a bad assumption. You're still cutting things off. I mean, really, as adults, if you went to somebody and started telling them something that was really difficult for you, and they just jumped right in and said, "Oh, I've been through it too, and this is what you should do to make everything all better." If it was a really good friend, you'd say, "Just hear me out."
right, right,
If it wasn't a really good friend, you'd say, "Thank you," and go find a good friend. You know what I mean? But children, young children below the tweens, I'll put it that way, are geared to please their parents. So you don't expect a 6-year-old to sit there and say, "Dad, will you just be quiet and let me finish?"
yeah,
They'll just sit there and go, "Uh-huh," and they'll be quiet. And dad thinks, "Okay, we talked about it. Everything's fine." Until 3 days later, something similar happens and their child's just as upset as they were.
right,
And I thought we talked about this. No, you didn't.
yeah,
You talked at him,
right,
redirect him, make a joke out of what he's doing. That's almost insulting, but he's trying to make the child laugh. You know, these are all things that we do in the name of trying to make the child feel better.
right.
But I tell parents, if it wouldn't work for you, why would it work for them?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I'm certainly guilty of it myself. I know I've, tried to get my kids to laugh, maybe to ease the tension that I felt, but really that wasn't the proper response in the moment, right? And whether they were toddlers or now as teenagers, right? I still have to meet them where they're at. And I'm wondering, as a dad, why is it so hard for us or for dads who are driven, ambitious, achievement oriented? Why is it so hard to show up as a soothing presence at home while still trying to be ambitious in other aspects of life?
Well, okay. One of the problems here is how we define the word support.
Sure.
Type A dads feel that they're, by working so hard, they are providing a really wonderful lifestyle for their family. Ergo, support.
Yep.
But it's not emotional support.
Right.
They're always thinking about work or at work. You see,
Yep.
you're not supporting us. What do you mean? I give you this great lifestyle. You see what I mean? It's how you define the word.
Yep.
The other is that, in this day and age, especially in its modern times, our professional identity is so important.
Yep.
You know, there's no such thing as job security anymore. We've always got to be pushing to do better. Bosses know this and they give you more and more to do. They don't usually pay you more, but they give you more and more to do.
Right.
They downsize, things like that. And you got to keep up with the guy next at the next desk. You know what I mean? So, these are real pressures on dads, moms too, but real pressures on dads. We are conditioned to be the breadwinner.
Yep.
In our culture, that's true. I think in most cultures, it might be true. I don't mean to stereotype, but really, you know, you go back and look at the old sitcoms, they would come home from the office, sit in his big leather chair and just relax, smoke a pipe.
Yep.
Yeah, right. You know what I mean? That doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
So, so the one that always cracked me up was, do you ever see the show The Waltons?
I think I've seen an episode or two back in the day.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Dad be deforesting his mountains to support his family during the Depression, basically.
Yeah.
So he's always at the sawmill. But his son comes along and says, Aaron, my sister has a problem. Can we talk about it? They walk around the forest for 3 hours talking about Aaron. And meanwhile, the guy who's waiting for his lumber is sitting there saying, where's my lumber?
Right.
I mean, it was so funny. I'd laugh at it because that
Yeah.
doesn't happen except on TV. But anyway, yeah, the pressures on dads these days is inordinate. And so they are typically in just putting out fires, reactive mode.
Yeah.
It's not their fault because they get immersed in it and they want to maintain for themselves their professional identity. It's important to us.
Right.
And so there's a lot of forces involved here. And unfortunately, that drifts down to their children.
Yeah.
I see a lot of kids in college prep schools, for instance, and they have to, from college, you got to get into Princeton, you got to get into Harvard, you got to get into Notre Dame, and so you have to take 4 AP courses, have a lead in a school play, and be an athlete.
Right.
And you wonder why they're coming to see me.
Right.
And I have to talk to parents. Look, he's not really geared to this all-male, sports-oriented college prep school. He has friends at the local high school. It's not as driven. Let him go there. So he won't go to Harvard. Maybe he'll go to Ohio State. So what? He'll be happy, be social, and as a teenager, that's important.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. It's interesting that I think it's easy for us as parents to sometimes forget or not recognize some of the impacts that we have on the greater effects of the impacts we have on the decisions we make for our kids or with our kids, right? It should be more with our kids than for our kids, right? Some of these decisions, whether it's,
right.
Whether they go to the private prep school or the public school, kind of what college they're going to, something I'm dealing with right now, or, even, what activities are the kids going to do after school when they're in elementary school, right? It's like, are you going to pack them up with 20 different activities? You're going to focus on one thing. Like, it has to, at the end of the day, it's easy to forget who you're doing it for, and you're doing it for your kids, right? You're not doing it for yourself, or you shouldn't be, right? You get the joy in seeing them succeed and seeing them be happy, right?
Yes.
So why make decisions that aren't going to make them happy?
For your own benefit.
Right.
For your own sense of status, to tell you the truth.
Right. But in the long run, what good does that do you? It makes you feel good in the moment, perhaps. Right. So that it's so easy to forget. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we default to those decisions because we're so busy. Right. And just like we're already making tons of decisions at work. Now we got to make more decisions at home and decisions in our own personal lives. We got to take care of ourselves. So I'm wondering, like, for dads who feel like work constantly bleeds into the family life, how should they think about kind of redesigning their time so presence is actually possible?
Okay. That's a great question. That's one of the things that's very important. I'll start with this is what we talk about predictable time, like you mentioned earlier. Child needs to know when you're available to them.
Right.
If not, it's always when. I mean, parents need to understand that I'm not going to use the word attention because that implies negative attention. He's just trying to get my attention. No, the term I share with parents is attended to. Our children need to be attended to in order to develop an emotional language, like we said, develop a healthy self-esteem, develop a safe place where they can express themselves. They need to be attended to. And I explained to them, being attended to is a need. It's not a wish. It's not a want. For instance, you may want a new car, but you can't afford one right now.
Right.
So you make the old one last a little longer. But a need is like air, food, and water.
Right.
And what happens if you don't have air for 3 minutes or water for 2 days
Yep.
or food for three?
Right.
That need will intensify until the point where all you can think about is that next breath of air. Well, emotional needs work the same way. So if a child can't get attended to by just being themselves, they'll do something
Yep.
to get attended to. And if that doesn't work and the emotional need intensifies, they'll do something even more visible and more graphic. What are they doing? They're acting out. That's what they're doing. They're being obnoxious. They're hitting their brother because they want to be attended to.
Right.
And then that's where we get into this really bad cross here where oh, he's just looking for attention. It's negative attention. So what do? We ignore it. Behavior modification says don't reinforce that behavior. Well, there's a point to that, but it doesn't work very well in this situation, because if you ignore it, you're ignoring the need. And it's just going to intensify to the point where the child will get your attention somehow.
Right.
And then we do get into behavior modification because there's something called secondary gain, which means a child has now learned if they push the envelope hard enough, they'll get their needs met.
Right.
Well, good luck with that one. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, that's why I really don't like the term attention because of what it implies,
Yep.
And this is something that's very common. Let's face it. I mean, this is what it is.
Absolutely.
So dads need to be aware of that. My son began to do some of that when he was like 3 or 4. And I turned to him and said, Seth, if you want my attention, just say the word attention. And he did. And not attend. You know what I did? This is very important. And this is again a personal observation, but when my son was like 4 and in preschool, I went to pick him up and he went, "Hey, Dad." I said, "Yeah." "I got into a fight." "Oh, yeah?" "Yeah, me and this boy went around the side of it. Daycare. Yeah, fight, I won." I'm sitting there going, I don't want him to become a bully.
Right.
That's not what he was a big kid. And so I realized, how am I going to do this? Well, what we did is we took Taekwondo together. So he could, he was his, fighting thing, but it was also, they teach you in the martial arts humility.
Yep.
That you don't fight. I mean, the idea of the martial arts is you learn not to fight, to tell you the truth. And plus it was going to be regular, predictable times, 3 days a week for parent-child class in Taekwondo.
Yeah.
Because with my schedule as a psychologist, I'd have evening hours, all that kind of thing. I knew if I didn't do this, I wouldn't have regular, predictable time with my son.
Yep.
We did this together for 5 years.
Wow.
From the age of 5 to 10. He took a year off to do baseball or something, and he came back to get his black belt. And by then, I was his black belt instructor. And it was so cool. He finally passed the test, and I put him up on my shoulder and walked him around the school. You know what I mean? It was a great experience.
That's
We
awesome.
still remember it.
That's
But
amazing.
that's what parents need to do, because we should get into self-esteem. There are 2 types of experiences that first build and then maintain self-esteem.
Okay.
The first one's called the mirroring experience. All right. Now, this is a little different than mirroring back what the child is telling you when they're upset. Okay. It's just another way of looking at the word mirroring. The mirroring experience is, okay, we'll go through the age, your 3-year-old makes a finger painting. It's a mess. He's a mess. But
Right.
what does he do with it? He comes up to you. "Look what I did, Daddy." And you can picture this. You're a dad. I'm a dad.
Yeah.
What
Absolutely.
do? They hold it in front of their chest like this.
Yeah.
"Look what I did." And what happens next? They look at your face.
Right.
And what they're looking for is what I term the gleam in your eye. It could be the biggest mess in the world, but you're going to go, "Gee, that's great."
Yeah.
Right? And you stick it up on the refrigerator. I tell parents, if I had the monopoly on refrigerator magnets, I'd be a very wealthy man, because that's what we all do.
Yeah.
The first trophy, the first report card, the first honor, look what I
Absolutely.
did. Gee,
Right.
that's great. That gets internalized, like I said.
Yep.
And now they can smile at themselves. And this is the basis of what we term confidence.
Yep.
That's the basis of confidence. The other part of self-esteem comes from what's called a merger experience, which in the psychobabble term, Michael, is merger with the idealized other. What that basically means is that children at a young age realize that you're better, bigger, faster, stronger, smarter than they are.
Yep.
And they want to be able to do what you do. I mean, what do children play at? They play at being daddy, they play at being fireman. I mean, they play at adult roles.
Right.
Now, they can't obviously do those things, but through
Right.
the buffer of fantasy,
Right.
they can. The merger experience is like the little boy pushing the toy mower when dad's mowing the lawn. Handing dad the tools while he's working on the car.
Right.
The easy bake oven while mom's making Thanksgiving dinner.
Yep.
You see what I mean? Those types of things. Because this is their way. I know I can't do it, but if I do it with you, I can feel like I can do it. That gets internalized, and that gives us a sense of competence.
Yes.
I can get things done. Confidence and competence are the two things that comprise self-esteem. We don't ever outgrow the need for these types of experiences.
Right.
For instance, the mirroring experience in an adult would be your job evaluation.
Yeah.
And we know how sensitive we are about our job evaluation.
Right.
It's
Good point.
The merger experience as an adult would be a mentor. Now, not everybody has a mentor, but if you do, they hold a special place in your life. It's not like they do the work for you, but if they're pleased with your work, you feel really good and you feel really confident.
Right.
So we need these experiences, and your children certainly need them.
Yep.
So my doing Taekwondo with my son, predictable time, something we had in common for 5 years, was our merger experience.
Love that. It's so interesting because it's so simple, right? It could be as simple as, cooking dinner or cleaning up. Like they can do things with you, beside you. And yeah, maybe the 3-year-old, their idea of cleaning up is a little bit different than yours, but it starts to give them confidence. It starts to give them, show them like this is a behavior to model, right? And finding those activities, whether it's small or it's, a larger commitment, maybe it is 3 times a week at Taekwondo, what you can fit. But the key here is that you do spend that time with your kids and you do allow them to showcase their growth and you acknowledge that to them, right? That will help them build their confidence so that they can continue to grow as humans. This has been super interesting and I don't want to run out of time. So I want to jump into our speed round, which is completely flip the script because these questions have nothing to do with anything. But we're gonna go after them anyways and see where we land. Yeah. So 5 quick questions for you. What's the first kids show theme song that comes to mind?
I don't have a good answer for this one. I'm being honest as hell with that. Kid shows, as a child psychologist, in me, I see very few kid shows that I think are really helpful for your kids. All right. The kid shows become the electronic babysitter because we're all so busy making sure that we keep up with work and on our computer and all that kind of stuff. So, I'm getting on a soapbox here. I do understand that, but
Sure. But is there a song that comes to mind? Any show?
Well, not any show, but the song "Cats in the Cradle."
Yeah, yeah.
Chapin,
Yeah,
that one. That's a psychologist song. Let me tell you,
I bet.
and I'm sure your dads should be aware of that song because it's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, I
So
listened
it's
to that
not a
on
kid
repeat.
show.
Yeah, I listened to that song on repeat when I was a teenager, so I remember that song.
Father and Son by Cat Stevens.
Yeah.
Same thing.
What was your very first job?
I was a newspaper boy.
Excellent.
I went around from zipping across the street dangerously, delivering papers in a big basket in front of and I was a good one, actually. I earned points and I got little prizes and stuff. And
that's awesome.
I earned my first 10-speed bike by being a newspaper boy.
Wow.
And I was very proud of that 10-speed bike.
I bet. Very impressive. Would you rather spend 24 hours with a toddler-sized T-Rex or a T-Rex-sized toddler?
I want the toddler because, he may be a brat, he may be all this type of thing.
Yeah.
But the earlier you start with what I've been talking about, the easier it is. I tell parents, you've heard the phrase, an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure.
Yeah.
And what I do, an ounce of prevention starting young is worth a ton of cure because you don't have to undo all of this other stuff that you've done wrong,
Right. So you don't mind that toddler is going to be enormous because it's a T-Rex size.
Right.
What's your go-to karaoke song or the one you would sing if you had to?
Like I said, I've done musicals before.
Sure.
My go-to song. Okay. Sunrise, Sunset.
Very nice. Classic. Like that. What's the weirdest thing you've ever carried around in your bag, briefcase, or pockets?
A rat.
A rat.
A rat. Before I got into clinical psychology, I was into experimental psychology. And I did a project before I went to grad school on the sexual differentiation of the brain. What makes a brain turn from female to male is actually what we're talking about. Now, in humans and most species, that happens in utero.
Yep.
But in rats, can happen within the first 3 days of life.
Huh.
So I had to invent a way of injecting a tiny, tiny bit of an estrogen into a certain tiny, tiny bit of this baby rat's, baby rat this big,
Yeah.
rat brain to see if it changes the sexual differentiation of the brain when they grew up. So how did I do this? This is kind of gross, but I'll share it anyway. When they grew up, they were all female rats. I had 140 of them in little cages and stuff.
Wow.
And when they grew up, I had to give them pap smears. 140 of them every day for 7 months.
Oh my goodness.
So I had a system. I had one in my pocket, one in my shoulder, and one in my hand. Now they all knew me, and they're not going to bite me. If they nibble on my ear a little, I just go like this, And so I'd have a rat in my lab coat pocket, and I'd find little rat raisins sometimes in my pocket. That's you asked. That was in my pocket.
I didn't say that was an answer I was expecting, but that was different. All right. So before we wrap up, I want to give you a chance to let listeners know where they can learn more from you and how they go deeper into your work. How can listeners find you or what you're working on?
Well, my website is ParentRx, parent, PARENTRX, like parent prescription.org.
Okay.
And they'll see other references to other podcasts, for instance, other things that I've written. If they want to consult with me individually, my email address is dsmarcus, DSMARCUS, PhD, at parentrx.org.
Right.
And, when the book comes out, they can contact me about that as well.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate it. Dave, thanks again for joining me today. I like how practical and grounded, your ideas were. And like, you have a way of talking about emotions and emotional connection that feels achievable, right? It's not overwhelming. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Finally, before you go, if you're a dad listening to this and you find yourself in between navigating a season that feels different, head to gap2gig.com and subscribe to the Gap to Gig newsletter. It comes out every Friday, and it's a quieter space to reflect on work, life, and what really matters right now. And if this conversation resonated, consider sending it to another dad who might need to hear it. Until next time, I'm Michael Jacobs. Thanks for showing up and listening to Gap to Gig.